With that, our last speaker of the morning is somebody who was part of an actual bright spot in 2014 elections. Abby Finkenauer is a representative from the Dubuque area. She's not just a rock-solid vote for us. She's somebody who comes from a union household, and I know that she's going to go into this, but she gets it. She understands what it's like. She understands what it's like to come from a union household. And I'm not going to steal her thunder on that, but what I do want to say is this. Maybe a week or two ago, a Koch brothers funded group came after Abby, and they said she needs to quit talking about equal pay. Well, if any of you have met Abby for 5 seconds, probably, I don't think that the Koch brothers are going to shut her up, and especially about equal pay for women. So Abby is our next speaker. She's going to talk to you about all the things that such as equal pay, but family issues that we need to get done, because all of these issues like Medicaid and school funding, they're sucking the air out of the room, and we can't even get to a conversation about workers' issues. So with that, please extend a warm welcome to Representative Abby Finkenauer.
Hello there. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. And I just want to start off with just thank you for all that you do for the state of Iowa and working families. We need you, and you're involved, and you're here, and it means the world, because we can't do what we do at the State House without you all being involved. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, when I was thinking about coming here today, I was pretty nervous. I'm still pretty new at this. I got elected in 2014, so talking to big crowds still makes me a little nervous. But I started thinking about it, and then I thought, well, it's kind of like going to talk to family. So, you know, I thought I'd be okay. And you are my family, because quite frankly, when I got elected in 2014, you had my back. Labor had my back. And I couldn't have done it without you. And then, you know, you had my back today as well. As I was driving in here from Dubuque, I had to go on I-80, and I don't know if you all drove in this morning. Oh my goodness. The snow was crazy, and I started going all across the road, and I was freaking out, and I get to Des Moines, and I call Charlie, and I go, okay, is this still going on today? And he's like, yeah, it is. I'm like, okay, but I'm terrified to drive. So he sent Ben to come pick me up, and that's just what family does. So thank you. And you know, another reason that you're family is because you grew up with the same values, and you give your children and your grandchildren the same values that I grew up with, which is the values of hard work, dedication, and the willingness to stand up and fight for what's not only right for your families, but families across the state of Iowa, even if they don't always know it. You know, those are the values that I grew up with watching my father, who's a union pipe fitter welder. And he taught me at a very early age that since I grew up in a working class household, that we didn't have the luxury of saying no when opportunities presented themselves. We didn't know when the next one was going to come up. So you had to say yes to every opportunity that presented itself. And you know, when there was work to be done, you said yes, and you did it. So that's how I grew up. I was, many of you don't know me or don't know my story, so I'll go into that a little bit. I was this kid who at the age of 10 begged my parents for a subscription to Newsweek for some reason. They didn't really know why, but they said, okay, we'll do that. And then I would sit around the table with my uncles and my grandpa, who was, he used to be president of the Iowa Firefighters Association, and then my dad, and we would talk about issues that were going on in the world. And just because I was a young girl, they still, you know, thought I had every right to be at the table with them. They cared about my opinions, and that shaped everything. So then I was a page in the U.S. House at 16. And then I graduated high school early, and I don't know if y'all remember Speaker Murphy. I became his speaker's page in 2007, the first year that he was Speaker of the Iowa House. I then met our now Vice President Joe Biden, worked on his presidential campaign, went to Drake, and then graduated from Drake and was a legislative assistant in the Iowa House for a couple years with a legislator that you all probably know, Representative Todd Taylor of Cedar Rapids. And I learned a great deal sitting next to him and sitting next to that man over there, Representative Bruce Hunter. Luckily, since I was Todd's clerk, I got to sit next to Bruce too and learned quite a lot, especially about labor issues and working family issues. So thank you, Representative Hunter. And then I ran for office. And now I'm a state representative, and I also got lucky and found this awesome job over the summer where I became state director of the Make It Work campaign. And that's an issue campaign that was here for the caucuses that focused on paid family leave, affordable childcare, and equal pay for equal work. Now, these issues are incredibly important, specifically, equal pay, because in Iowa, we actually have worse equal pay statistics than the rest of the nation. Right now in Iowa, a woman gets about 77 cents on the dollar to a man's dollar. In the United States, it's 79 cents to a dollar. It's even worse when you talk about minorities. So it's a huge issue. And it's an even bigger issue when you take into account that 3 out of 4 women in the state of Iowa are either the sole or co-breadwinners in their family. And when a woman is getting paid 77 cents to a man's dollar, that's an average of losing out on $11,000 a year. So these aren't just women issues, these are family issues. And affordable childcare is another large one. With Make It Work, there was a large canvas we had going across the state and talking to families and asked them, what's one of your number one hurdles? And they kept saying, childcare. Childcare is more than my rent. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to make it. And if, I make 10 cents more than I am right now, then I hit the cliff and I'm not getting any childcare assistance. And how do I do that? Because I want to do better, but it's not making sense. And these policies aren't working. And then you have paid leave, where you have mothers who are going back to work after not even being able to spend, 2 weeks home with their child. And God forbid you have a premature child, where you actually have to spend the time in the hospital and then you might get to go home with it, maybe for a week. And you either have to go back to work, and you need to go back to work because you need your insurance, or you quit work and you ended up getting to stay home with your child but then losing your insurance. So it's this horrible cycle that we're in right now, and our policies have just not kept up with the times. Quite frankly, we are living in a world that still has 1950s mentality and policies, and that's just not the case anymore. And part of the reason that's not the case anymore, and the reason we need to update these, is because our wages have remained stagnant since the 1980s. So to be in a middle class, working class household anymore, you do typically need 2 incomes. That means that both parents are typically working. And these policies have just not updated to keep up with those times. I grew up with the story, and so many of people my age actually grew up with these stories of, my grandfather was in World War II, and he got shot with shrapnel and came home, ended up getting a job at the Dubuque Packing Company, worked on the line, and made about $20,000 to $30,000 a year on the line at the pack. It was a great union job. In today's money, that's about $80,000 with benefits. So he was able to, had my grandmother. My grandmother did stay home most of the time, but she did go to the grocery store because they wanted to send my dad and my aunt to Catholic school, so they did have to have another income to an extent. But, they weren't just able to have a life, they were able to live with that pay. And that's the problem. We now have wages that have remained stagnant, and you have people picking between making a living and having a life. And that shouldn't be a choice that we have to make in Iowa or across the nation. And it's frustrating to see. Another issue that does not necessarily get talked about or lumped in with working families issues, but I know many of you in this room will take it as personally as I do, is prevailing wage. Now, the reason that is so important is because I grew up with a father who's a union pipe fitter welder, so he worked out of town most of my life. That's where the jobs were. I know there are carpenters, steel workers, iron workers, IBEW, and the list goes on of people in this room who have to take jobs out of state because there's better paying jobs out of state than actually in the state of Iowa because of the fact that we do not have prevailing wage here. So when these Republicans like to talk about family values, but they refuse to actually address policies that value families, we got issues. Because this policy addresses families. This policy, if we were to pass prevailing wage in the state of Iowa, would mean that we would have more dads, more moms, home for baseball games and birthday parties. And you know, I'm also really tired about that new senator that got elected the same night that I did, Joni Ernst, you might all know her. She likes to, talk nationally about the fact that she thinks she gets working families or understands them. I don't know if y'all remember about a year ago, she talked about wearing bread bags on her feet, and then everybody thought that, she really gets working families in Iowa. Yeah, they all wear bread bags. I'm angry about that because that's not, that might be the way she grew up, is protecting her feet with bread bags, but the way I grew up was watching caller ID come through watching the phone at my household, watching caller ID, waiting for my dad's business agent to show up on the phone because my dad's been out of work for 6 months. She doesn't know what that's like. And she doesn't know what it's like to be a little girl that goes to sleep at night because you miss your dad because he is working out of town, that goes to sleep at night in his old t-shirts or his old sweatshirts that happen to have tiny little holes all over them, like this sweatshirt. I don't know if many of you know what these holes are. I think many of you in this room probably do. But those are the burn holes that would come through my dad's protective layer when he was welding and burn his skin. So she might have grown up with those bread bags protecting her pretty shoes. But, as Democrats, as working families, we don't need plastic to protect us. We're not afraid of a little dirt. We're not afraid of getting burned. We're not afraid of some hard work. And that's what working families in Iowa are actually all about. And that's the story that needs to be told about Iowa, not this protecting your feet with bread bags. So with that, I want to tell you, we need more working families. We need more people who understand what it's like growing up that way in the Iowa House and in courthouses throughout the state. We need people in this room to want to run for office. We need you to be the ones sitting around the kitchen table with your kids, your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren, and telling them about your life and how you're making it or how you're struggling, because they need to hear those stories. So many of them don't. And it's so important that they do, because one day they could be standing in front of an awesome room of people and wondering, how in the world did I get here? And their answer might end up simply just being you. So please keep that in mind. And right now I will take questions.
Questions for Abby?
I have a comment and a question, and one of the things I was going to say for equal pay, and a lot of us, because we have union contracts, we can open up the contract and we know what we're going to get paid for our job.
Absolutely.
But if you don't have a union contract, the biggest reason we don't have equal pay is payroll secrecy.
Absolutely.
Because people could get fired if they talk about how much they make. The other thing I'd like you to explain a little bit more on the child care cliff that you talked about. If they get a raise, they hit the cliff.
Yeah, so right now in Iowa, you can qualify for Childcare Assistance if you are making 40% of the median, up to 40% of the median income in Iowa. So if all of a sudden you get a 10-cent raise, which there is one woman I did talk to where that became an issue. She was going to school at the time as well. And she lost her childcare assistance because she got a 10-cent raise, because that equaled her making more than that 40% of the median income. What we'd like to do is figure out a way to actually have, we could do it through a tax deduction for working families, but we need to make sure that it is hitting the families that need it the most, and sometimes tax deductions aren't necessarily the way to do it. So we need to look at different policies to make sure that that is an issue. and really address that cliff that I was talking about. So is there a more gradual way to help people? And like I said, yeah, these policies have just not adapted to either the wages we have right now and just the way a working family looks. It's not the same as it used to be. So that's part of the issue. Yeah. Oh, hi.
I got kind of a two-part question for you.
Yeah.
You're talking about childcare, and a lot of families, like you said, can't afford. Now, we're also wanting to see minimum wage get raised.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we'll see $15 in Iowa, but I think we could see 10 to 12. What kind of incentives would there be for either companies or even to start still being able to give families helping hand towards childcare? Because, like you said, most families you go talk to, that's the one thing they can't afford. And it's giving up clothes to pay for childcare or medicines or even paying insurance.
Absolutely, and part of that, you hit the nail on the head, has to do with the minimum wage in Iowa and our wages in general in Iowa. It's really frustrating for me to see that, and that would address childcare. If we actually were making more, we could afford childcare a little bit differently than we can right now. But that's not necessarily the case in Iowa because of the fact, so for example, some of the committees I sit on, so I sit on labor, I sit on transportation, I sit on ways and means, and I sit on economic growth and the economic development appropriation subcommittee. The other day, we had Debbie Durham, our economic development director, in talking to us, and she says every year, our number one issue in Iowa is that we can't keep people here. We have low unemployment. We need more people. They're leaving. So what do we do to address that? And then we had, Representative Zach Nunn talking about millennials. And yes, what do we do to keep them? And then finally, I just asked her. I go, look, are you doing anything to talk to companies to actually raise their wages? Because that sure would keep people here. That would attract people here. And when I went and toured a biodiesel plant this last interim, I went to Dyersville, and the CEO, President Guy, is walking me around the room, and first of all, I called him out for the rat labor that was done on the pipe fitting, because I knew my dad sure didn't work on that. But then he started complaining about not being able to keep 2 janitors. And he's like, yeah, I hire them, and then 2 months later, I got to hire more people. They end up, getting a job at John Deere, and I just can't compete with that. And I go, well, yeah, because they're going to John Deere for the union wages and, health care and benefits. So maybe if you offered higher wages and health care and benefits, you could keep these people. And he's like, well, I just can't do that. And I'm looking at him, and I am thinking, you literally just sat with me in your office telling about the record profits you all have, and yet you can't afford to pay people $30 an hour? Are you kidding me? So now they bring in people, a cleaning crew, once a month from Cedar Rapids to do it. And I'm just so tired of people complaining that they can't keep workers, but yet refusing to pay the workers. It's ridiculous. And it's something that, I asked her, are you talking to companies about this? What are we doing to train companies to say, if you want people in Iowa, pay them? She said she's talked to some about it, some about that, and that this one company wanted to pay their people $10 an hour, and she said, you can't do that. I'm like, well, thanks, that's one start, but we can do a lot more, and part of that has to do with raising the minimum wage.
Bobby?
Yeah, I just want to have a comment. Abby, I want to thank you so much for being such a tremendous advocate for all working families. I think there's a lesson here for myself and maybe others who have children, and I have children in the trades. I have children attending, college. But you're a role model. I think that we need to work harder to get more of our own families in the process. And I haven't had a chance to meet you before, and I just want to tell you I'm so impressed. You're definitely a blessing up there, and thank you so much for the sacrifice for what you do.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. And if, you leave today and the one thing you leave with is the idea that you could go home and talk to your kids about this stuff, and then, if they're interested in it, have them contact me. I'll talk to them. Have them come down to the Capitol for a day, hang out with me, There's other people down there too. That would be great. Bruce would hang out with them. I hung out with Bruce for 2 years, and look what happened. So, yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Both my daughters are single parents, but my oldest daughter, she works for Wells Fargo. She's been with them for 5 years, and she receives very little in child support. I would like to know what determines, or how does the DHS determines childcare assistance? I believe she had to make maybe $300 less in order to qualify for childcare assistance. So actually, she had to quit working overtime in order to qualify for childcare, which will last through May. But of course, she had to go back working overtime. So the next time when it goes around, she's not able to qualify again. So I'm not pretty sure exactly how does DHS determines how much you make, how much you need to make. And actually, they include the child support also.
Yeah, exactly. So that actually has to do with that 40% of the median income, and which is not okay. That is something we need to raise. So what I would like to see, honestly, is if you make over 200% of that median income, because this is really affecting all families. It's something that we need to address and we need to work on now. And it's, your daughter is a perfect example of families just do not look like they did in the 1950s. That's not how it works anymore. And we need to change these policies that have been put in place. So hopefully, part of actually addressing that is making sure that Democrats take back the Iowa House, and that we keep the Iowa Senate, and that we put a Democratic governor in there in 2018, because so many of these policies no one wants to talk about in the House. Not no one, sorry. Bruce wants to talk about it, I want to talk about it. There's plenty of Democrats that want to talk about it, but unless we have the majority, they don't want to talk about it. We can put in all the bills we want in committee, and they don't even they barely give us a subcommittee. If maybe they give us a subcommittee, but it's typically on their bills that try to take away workers' rights, not anything that actually helps working families. So it's incredibly frustrating, to sit there and see this time and time again when there are real issues and real people being affected that need to stay engaged. And your daughter, I want her to share her story. I want you to share your daughter's story. So thank you for that. And these Republicans, the ones that refuse to bring up these bills, need to hear those stories. And they need to hear them in their districts, especially those swing districts that we can win back. And they need to know that I'm so tired of hearing them talk about family values, but yet refuse to have any policies that actually value families.